Columbia with a question regarding final entry switch list verification aft station on page A3-24.
Go ahead, Laurel.
This is regarding the payload recorder function switch. The switch list verification shows it in the middle position for mode selected is currently in operation.
In Laurel, the recorder is off, so either position is fine, but thanks for checking.
You betcha.
And Charlie, with that, the aft final entry switch list verification is complete.
Copy, Willie.
This is Mission Control Houston aboard Columbia. The crew going through their final switch list verifications. Those checking all of the switches, 1,000 switches total in the shuttle cabin, flight deck and mid-deck to ensure they're all properly configured for entry and landing by the shuttle.
Go ahead.
Charlie, we're doing a review of everything that is in the deorbit book to make sure we've covered it all. I don't believe that we did the payload deac. It's in the payload ops per message 240 Bravo. It's mostly checks, and we're going to put that in work right now if you concur.
And Willie, just for clarification, as long as you comply with message 240 Bravo, we think you'll be in good shape. We might have one more thing. Stand by.
Okay, standing by.
Willie, the last thing, we'll take block 22 on time.
Block 22 on time.
Those calls with Columbia pilot Willie McCool and spacecraft communicator Capcom Charlie Hobart here in Mission Control dealing with landing preparations continuing on board. Again, the crew checking and reviewing all configurations aboard the shuttle to ensure that everything is in order for landing. Also, McCool given a go-ahead to align all the inertial measurement units on board with one another to ensure navigation is as precise as possible for the shuttle in advance of beginning its descent from orbit. About an hour and 8 minutes away from an engine firing that will begin Columbia's descent toward Florida. Flight controllers here continue to watch the weather at the Kennedy Space Center shuttle landing facility. The forecast remains favorable for landing for Columbia. Current conditions, however, have shown some decrease in visibility due to fog in the area of the shuttle landing facility runway. However, it is believed that sunrise, upcoming in just a few minutes for the Kennedy Space Center, will quickly begin to dissipate that fog with conditions favorable again for landing. Landing anticipated a little over 2 hours from now at 8:16 a.m. Central Time.
We're ready for the item 16.
Flight controllers also are continuing to watch winds aloft, however, around the Kennedy Space Center, watching balloon information from weather balloons that are released periodically there to gauge winds at altitudes of 50,000 feet on down. Looking at some strong and abrupt direction changes in those winds, evaluating whether those are of a concern or not for Columbia, and also evaluating what impact that might have on a choice of ends of the runway for the shuttle landing facility runway. Currently, Columbia aimed for runway 33 end of the shuttle landing facility. That could be changed, however. Plenty of time to change that as Columbia continues its landing preparations if required. On board, the crew has donned their launch and entry suits to recap events this morning. All landing preparations have gone right on schedule, with closing of the payload bay doors occurring at about 4:50 a.m. Central Time. That completed. The doors closed and latched. Completely normal operations. All systems on board Columbia continue in excellent shape and no concerns with them for landing. The crew finished up their experiment work and sealed up the Space Hab module this morning about 1 a.m. Central Time, closing the hatch between that module and the rest of the spacecraft. All of that proceeding normally as well.
Columbia Houston for a big picture for your deorbit.
Houston, go ahead with the big picture.
Rick, we we would like you to begin fluid loading on time per the prescription in the flight note. As a big picture on weather, we are working two issues as far as weather is concerned, both of which we think will be favorable. First is visibility. It's right now the observation is no-go. However, sun's just now starting to come up, and we're expecting the visibility to improve quickly. The other is runway selection and winds aloft that affect runway selection. But both of those we think we have resolution to. So at this time, we're expecting want you to get ready for the first rev deorbit. We do have the second rev if needed.
Okay, we copy. We've got the fluid loading in progress, and for the weather, we copy that you're looking at the visibility right now and runway selection based on high altitude winds.
It's a good readback, Rick.
That call from Capcom astronaut Charlie Hobaugh to Commander Rick Husband aboard Columbia, giving the crew a go to begin fluid loading. That basically means the crew will begin drinking quantities of fluid that will assist as their bodies readapt to gravity upon their descent from orbit. Fluid is lost as part of the body's adaptation to weightlessness early on after a shuttle crew arrives in orbit, and drinking fluids before beginning their descent helps the body readapt by regaining that fluid that is lost and remains lost and not required while the crew is in weightlessness. So they'll begin that drinking now in preparation for their return home. Also, Hobaugh pointing out the two issues that are being evaluated, both of which flight controllers are optimistic will not pose a problem for the landing, but one, an observed condition at present at the shuttle landing facility runway of low visibility due to ground fog. It's believed that sunrise happening at present at the Kennedy Space Center will dissipate that fog, and it will not pose a problem for landing. The forecast is for visibility to be unlimited for landing for Columbia, so that will be watched closely over the next half hour or so to ensure that that fog does indeed do as predicted and dissipate. Also, flight controllers looking at unusually strong and unusually shifting winds aloft to ensure that those do not pose a concern for Columbia's descent, and primarily to evaluate which runway would be best suited for Columbia's touchdown today, approach to the Kennedy Space Center, which end of the shuttle landing facility runway, runway 33 or runway 15, would be best used by Columbia. So that evaluation continues. More balloon data is expected in the control center as that is gathered.
the payload entry switch list verification is complete, and we show page A1-15 complete.
And Rick, we copy.
This is Mission Control Houston. Columbia is currently 166 statute miles above the Midwest United States. It's a final planned orbital pass above the continental United States. On its next approach to the United States, it'll be descending in the atmosphere, crossing the California coast, and presenting a potential spectacle for observers on the ground in the San Francisco, Sacramento area of California. That coastal crossing for Columbia and a viewing opportunity for its descent from Sacramento and San Francisco would begin about 5:51 a.m. Pacific Standard Time as Columbia is descending toward the Kennedy Space Center. We're about 50 minutes away from engine firing that will begin Columbia's descent to Kennedy for the first of 2 landing opportunities available for the shuttle today. That engine firing set for 7:15 a.m. Central Time, landing touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center shuttle runway would occur at 8:16 a.m. Central. On board Columbia, all activities have gone smoothly throughout the morning. The crew in the final stages of their preparations now, taking their seats and preparing for the deorbit burn. They've been given a go to begin drinking quantities of fluid as part of the preparation for their readaptation to Earth's gravity upon their descent from orbit. That's occurring right on schedule, as have all activities during the morning. Flight controllers here monitoring weather conditions at the Kennedy Space Center's landing facility, continuing to watch fog and ascertain that it will dissipate. That fog limiting visibility in current observations at the runway, but with sunrise occurring in Florida, it's expected that over the next half hour it will begin to rapidly clear, and conditions will improve visibility-wise on the surface around the shuttle landing facility runway. Also, flight controllers are continuing to receive data from weather balloons launched around the shuttle landing facility runway to ascertain the strength of upper-level winds and their directions, to evaluate potential runway selections for Columbia's descent, whether it will come in at runway 33 end of the shuttle landing facility or the runway 15 end. It's currently targeted toward runway 33, and also to ascertain if those upper-level winds pose any concerns for Columbia's approach to Kennedy this morning. But again, overall, the forecast is favorable for landing, and flight controllers are optimistic both of the current issues will be resolved with weather concerns in Florida as they continue landing preparations on board.
Yes, we show ourselves on page A1-19. We do have blocks 24 and 25 are NA. We'll put 28 and 29 in work, and then 26 and 27 will be called out later. And once we get all those done, we think we'll be done with deorbit prep. We're going to press on to the entry checklist, deorbit burn.
Hey Rick, thanks for that tag up, and we concur with all. Houston, state vectors coming on board.
We copy.
This is Mission Control Houston. This is a live television view of the shuttle landing facility runway at the Kennedy Space Center. This now a view from a camera atop the vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center. Again, current observations showing limited visibility due to ground fog in the area. Sunrise with the sun coming up in...
And Rick, we're ready for the gimbal check.
With the sun now coming up, it's believed that the fog will dissipate rapidly and visibility will quickly improve. That's the forecast for Columbia's first landing opportunity of the day today. We're about 42 minutes away from an engine firing that would begin Columbia's descent toward Florida for that first of two opportunities available for a landing at the shuttle landing facility today. Flight controllers also have continued to receive data on upper level winds in the vicinity of the shuttle landing facility, showing that trend improving as well and not likely to pose a concern for Columbia's landing. Still evaluating, however, which runway would be selected for Columbia upon its descent, and watching the visibility conditions at the Kennedy Space Center and a trend in that area.
Houston 8 pre-starting work.
We copy. Columbia, Houston for Rick. We show page 3-5 complete. No reason to load the targets. We'll pick it up a little bit later.
Okay, we copy. 3-5 complete. No reason to load. Thanks.
This is Mission Control Houston. This live television view of the Kennedy Space Center as seen from the top of the vehicle assembly building. A 360-degree pan of the area, looking at visibility conditions. Again, that visibility limited at present by ground fog that is believed will dissipate very quickly now that the sun is up at Kennedy. Flight controllers watching and monitoring that weather condition to ensure that that will indeed be the case, and it will not pose any visibility restrictions for a landing by Columbia at the first of two opportunities today. That again for a touchdown in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central. Columbia's crew has performed all landing preparations on board per schedule today, given a go at every step as they've made preparations on board. One of the next milestones will be for the crew to begin reorienting the shuttle from its current orientation, one that supports the best possible communications between the spacecraft and the ground, to the orientation required for an engine firing to begin its descent from orbit. That engine firing about 39 minutes away now.
Columbia, complete with 3-8, working on Ohm's burn prep.
Copy.
This is Mission Control Houston. We continue to watch a live television picture from the Kennedy Space Center from the roof of the Vehicle Assembly Building looking out at the shuttle landing facility runway at Kennedy. Evident is the weather condition being monitored at present, fog that restricts visibility, current visibility at the runway. The forecast is that that fog will rapidly dissipate as the morning progresses. Flight controllers monitoring that as the clocks count down toward what would be the start of the first opportunity, the first of two for a landing by Columbia in Florida today, about 35 minutes away now from an engine firing that would begin Columbia's descent toward Florida for that first opportunity. That engine firing set for 7:15 a.m. Central Time would lead to a touchdown at the shuttle runway in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central. Visibility has been slowly improving as conditions have been monitored. Again, that is forecast to continue as the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher in the sky in Florida.
Columbia. Galley DX, Block 26 is complete.
We copy, Rick. Block 26 complete. Columbia, Houston, for your deorbit burn.
Go ahead, Houston.
You have a go to perform the deorbit update uplink procedures on the top of page 3-11. You have a go for Ops 302. We are still evaluating the weather, so at this time you are not go for the deorbit burn yet. We would like you to maneuver on time for preparation for the deorbit burn, however.
Okay, copy. We're clear to proceed on with the deorbit update uplink procedures on 3-11. Clear to Ops 302. Still evaluating the weather, so we're not go yet for the burn, but we will maneuver on time.
Good readback.
This is Mission Control Houston. That call up to Commander Rick Husband aboard Columbia from Capcom Charlie Hobaugh here in Mission Control, giving the crew a go for everything except the engine firing that would begin the shuttle's descent from orbit. That engine firing would be about 26 minutes away. Columbia will maneuver to the right orientation for that firing. Flight controllers here continue to monitor the weather at the Kennedy Space Center, including a ground fog that has restricted visibility. That fog anticipated to dissipate as the sun heats up the Kennedy Space Center area. Flight controllers continue to monitor that and gauge that dissipation before providing a go for Columbia's return on this first of 2 opportunities available for a landing today.
Houston, based upon your last call, I understand that you want us to reload the targets, item 22 and item 23.
That's affirmed, and we're also still waiting on vent door close, the item 44 on spec 51. And
Okay, we gave that to you just a moment.
we saw it. We knew you were all over it.
Houston, Columbia, here comes the Ops 302.
And Rick, we're ready for Ops 302.
Houston, Columbia, here comes the maneuver.
And Rick, we're ready for the maneuver.
This is Mission Control Houston on board Columbia. The crew maneuvering the shuttle toward an orientation for a firing of its engines to begin its descent from orbit toward Florida. About 18 minutes away from when that firing would take place to begin its descent toward the Kennedy Space Center for the first of two opportunities available for a landing in Florida by the shuttle today. Here in Mission Control, flight controllers getting final updates on the weather and update on observations of approaches to the runway from Chief Astronaut Kent Rominger, who's been flying the shuttle training aircraft at the Kennedy Space Center, flying practice approaches to the shuttle runway. Of concern during the morning has been fog that has been shown to dissipate around Kennedy. Whether or not that is dissipating quickly enough is the question that flight controllers are getting updates on. Also, continuing to evaluate this runway would be chosen for Columbia's descent, runway 33 end of the shuttle landing facility, or runway 15. This is a live view of the shuttle runway as seen from a camera atop the vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center. The Space Shuttle Columbia at present 171 miles above the southern tip of Africa, 16 minutes away from an engine firing that would begin its trip home after 16 days of around-the-clock science in orbit. This is Mission Control Houston, 174 miles above the Indian Ocean, just off the east coast of Africa. Columbia is in the proper orientation for a firing by its twin orbital maneuvering system engines. It would begin its descent from orbit, a return to Florida this morning. That would be a 2-minute, 38-second long firing of its orbital maneuvering system engines to begin that descent. On board, the crew has completed preparations for landing, all of that going like clockwork throughout the morning, closing up their science work in the wee hours this morning, shutting the hatch to the Space Hab module that was the center of most of the 80 scientific investigations conducted on board at about 1 a.m. today, and then moving through all of their landing preparations very smoothly. Flight controllers are currently monitoring the weather at the Kennedy Space Center landing site, specifically fog that has limited visibility but is dissipating. Using reports from the shuttle training aircraft that has been flown on practice approaches to the runway by Chief Astronaut Kent Rominger, satellite imagery, ground observations from weather observers, and forecasts from the Spaceflight Meteorology Group here in Houston at Mission Control, all of that data being evaluated a final time, standing by for a decision on whether Columbia will proceed or not with this engine firing about 11 minutes away at 7:15 a.m. Central Time to lead to a touchdown in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central. Again, a 2-minute, 38-second long firing that would occur as Columbia is over the Indian Ocean, just moving into evening to the west of Australia. It would first encounter the effects of Earth's atmosphere north of the Hawaiian Islands above the Pacific at an altitude of 75 statute miles and begin its descent into the atmosphere at that point, crossing the continental United States above the coast of California, above the San Francisco Bay Area, and just to the south of Sacramento, providing persons in that area a potentially spectacular view of the shuttle's descent through the atmosphere with superheated air, creating a plasma trail from horizon to horizon for the shuttle. It would be visible in the Sacramento-San Francisco area first at about 5:51 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for about 4 minutes, crossing that area.
From Teeter's handover, and we'll get back to you on the other side.
We copy, Houston.
We haven't forgotten about you.
Columbia would continue across the southwestern United States, allowing potential viewing from Las Vegas as well, being visible there about 5:54 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for about 2 minutes at an elevation of about 22 degrees. In the Sacramento-San Francisco area, it would be at an elevation almost directly overhead of about 78 degrees. It would also be visible from Flagstaff, Arizona, and then from Albuquerque, New Mexico, just to the south of Albuquerque as it moves towards Sunrise and Florida. At present, Columbia is targeted toward runway 33 of the shuttle landing facility, that end of the shuttle landing facility runway. To approach that runway, it would perform a right overhead 213-degree turn on its final approach to align with the runway. The runway selection continues to be evaluated based on weather conditions and the latest data here in Mission Control. That decision also pending for Columbia. So again, less than 10 minutes now to an engine firing by Columbia to begin its descent. About 9 minutes away. That would occur at 7:15 a.m. for a touchdown at 8:16 a.m. Central Time at the Kennedy Space Center's runway. The first of 2 opportunities available for landing. Weather being evaluated here in Mission Control, and a decision expected very shortly. This is a live television view of the shuttle runway at the Kennedy Space Center from a camera atop the Vehicle Assembly Building. The sun well up at Kennedy as fog continues to dissipate the vicinity. Evaluating the information is Entry Flight Director Leroy Kane here in Mission Control, overseeing activities for the descent of Columbia. Providing communications with Columbia is astronaut Charlie Hobaugh. Flight Director Leroy Kane discussing weather conditions at present with forecasters here at Mission Control.
Columbia, Houston.
Go ahead, Houston.
Yeah, Rick, I guess you've been wondering, but you are go for the deorbit burn. We are going to continue to assess which runway end we prefer, but for now we are happy with the weather at KSC. You are go for the burn.
Okay, we copy go for the burn. Right now we're leaving KSC 33 until we hear otherwise. And that would be our preference with a headwind, but I know you guys have to look at the energy as well.
And Rick, we appreciate your assessment, and that's one thing we were hoping for. There are other issues, and we'll give you the best option we can.
We copy, and we appreciate it. Also, we'll plan on PLT flying prior to the hack if everything stays the same as we were read up earlier.
We copy, Rick.
Capcom astronaut Charlie Hobaugh passing along a go to Commander Rick Husband of Columbia and his crew of 7 to come home this morning to the Kennedy Space Center at the first opportunity to fire Columbia's engines in under 6 minutes from now, about 5.5 minutes to begin its descent from orbit and an approach to the Kennedy Space Center that would have it touch down at the shuttle runway at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Flight controllers continue to evaluate which end of the runway Columbia will approach based on weather conditions. Runway 15 or runway 33 as the ends are labeled. Both ends are acceptable at this point. It's just a matter of which one is the very best. Again, this engine firing will be a 2-minute, 38-second long firing of Columbia's twin orbital maneuvering system engines to begin its descent.
We're ready for single APU start, attempt 2.
That call from Columbia indicating that they're starting one of the 3 auxiliary power units on board the shuttle. Those are generators that supply power for the shuttle's hydraulic systems, which in turn are used to operate the elevons and rudder and speed brake, the aero surfaces of the shuttle. One of the 3 generators is started prior to this engine firing. The other 2 will be started after the engine firing is completed and while Columbia is on its descent toward the atmosphere.
Houston, we're about 30 seconds to a teeter's handover. We may have some Radicom on the next satellite.
Okay, Houston, we copy.
about 2.5 minutes away from an engine firing to begin Columbia's journey home to Florida this morning. Columbia moving into its final orbital sunset. It'll move into sunrise again as it descends through the atmosphere en route to Florida above the southwestern United States. Columbia is 176 miles above the Indian Ocean to the west of Australia, about 30 seconds away from the start of an engine firing to begin its descent toward Florida, completing 16 days of scientific work in orbit. This will be a 2-minute, 38-second long firing of both orbital moving system engines for the shuttle, putting it on a course toward a touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center's shuttle runway at 8:16 a.m.
We copy, Houston. Thanks.
Watching over the operation of the orbital maneuvering system engines is Propulsion Officer Dean Lenort, reporting both firing now and looking good. 2 minutes and 38 seconds that both will fire to drop Columbia out of orbit, put it on a course toward its first encounters with the atmosphere at an altitude of about 75 miles above the Pacific Ocean to the north of the Hawaiian Islands. Columbia's altitude at present 175 statute miles. A little over 1.5 minutes left to go in the deorbit engine firing for Columbia, putting Columbia on course toward a touchdown in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central Time today. About 20 seconds left in a deorbit engine firing for Columbia, beginning its descent to Earth.
Houston, good burn, no trim required.
We copy and concur. Houston, thanks.
Okay, we'll meet you in post-burn.
The guidance officer confirming that Columbia is right on track toward a landing at the Kennedy Space Center at 8:16 a.m. Central. Its first encounter with the atmosphere will come in about 25 minutes as it descends to an altitude of about 75 statute miles above the Pacific Ocean, north of the Hawaiian Islands. Its altitude at present 176 statute miles. Several activities that will take place on board for the crew. They'll begin to power up the two remaining auxiliary power units. Those are generators, one of which was started prior to the engine firing, that supply power to the hydraulic systems on board that operate the shuttle's elevons, rudder, and speed brake, its aero surfaces. They'll also begin maneuvering the shuttle to the proper orientation for its first encounters with the atmosphere, that with the nose angled up about 40 degrees and wings level to control heating on the spacecraft, using the thermal tiles on the bottom of the spacecraft to control heating as it begins its initial descent into the upper extremes of Earth's atmosphere. As Columbia descends into the atmosphere and approaches the continental United States, it'll begin a series of 4 steep banks that it will follow through its approach all the way to the Kennedy Space Center. Those perform to dissipate speed as it descends and air pressure builds. Also, as it descends, its steering jets will control its orientation at first. They'll gradually be turned off, turning control of the spacecraft over to aero surfaces. As the shuttle transitions from spacecraft to aircraft, its elevons and ailerons and rudder will become active.
And we're ready for 303, Rick.
San Houston, here comes the maneuver.
And Rick, we're ready for the maneuver. And looking ahead, secondary actuator check not required. I'll get you a time for your forward dump in a moment.
Columbia beginning a maneuver to position it for its first encounter with the atmosphere.
Secondary actuator check not required. And we'll do the ohms, give a little power down.
We copy.
The crew also began dumping excess reaction control system propellant from the forward reaction control system steering jets. Those by firing the jets to dump that propellant prior to its encounter with the atmosphere. For Columbia's descent on the flight deck at the commander's seat, Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool to his right. In the center seat, aft center seat of the flight deck, is Flight Engineer Kapana Chawla. Seated on the flight deck for landing as well is Mission Specialist Laurel Clark. On the middeck, the lower deck of Columbia for landing, Payload Specialist Ilan Ramon of the Israel Space Agency, Mission Specialist David Brown, and Mike Anderson, Payload Commander.
6-3 seconds.
Copy, 6-3 seconds.
That's a call that the forward reaction control system jets will be fired for about 63 seconds to dump all excess propellant from them before encountering the atmosphere. Columbia's descent toward Florida will take it across the breadth of the continental United States. It'll cross the west coast of the United States above the San Francisco Bay Area of California, providing a spectacular sighting opportunity for persons in the San Francisco and Sacramento, California Bay Area. For the San Francisco area, Columbia should first become visible about 5:51 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, be visible for about 4 minutes from San Francisco and Sacramento, an elevation of about 78 degrees in the pre-dawn sky of California, almost directly overhead of that area. It'll also be visible from Las Vegas as it continues its descent across the southwest United States at an elevation of about 22 degrees from Las Vegas. Visible there about 5:54 to 5:56 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. A minute or so later, it'll become visible from Albuquerque, New Mexico, moving to the south of Albuquerque, and also above Flagstaff, Arizona just before that. It'll move into sunrise as it continues east across the United States toward Florida, headed toward a touchdown there at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Propulsion officer here reports that dump of propellant through the forward reaction control system jets on Columbia is in progress. That going as planned. The crew also soon will start the two remaining auxiliary power units on board. Those two generators that will join a third that was started prior to the engine firing that began the shuttle's descent to generate power for the shuttle's hydraulic systems during the entry and landing. About 17 minutes away from Columbia's first encounters with the atmosphere, that occurring in altitude of about 75 miles above the Pacific Ocean to the north of the Hawaiian Islands. It's Mission Control Houston, Flight Dynamics Officer here in Mission Control, Richard Jones, continuing to discuss runway options and approach for Columbia, the best possible approach for the shuttle landing facility. Columbia currently targeted toward a landing on Kennedy Space Center runway 33, end of the shuttle landing facility runway. Discussion as to whether or not that may be switched to runway 15. That decision expected as Columbia continues its descent. There's no issue with making that decision as Columbia is descending. That's been done during previous shuttle entries as well. The Flight Dynamics Officer oversees the trajectories of the shuttle and its flight as it enters the atmosphere, and also during launch. Again, discussion underway still of the runway that will be selected as the final runway for Columbia's landing. Columbia on track, though, for touchdown around 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Altitude now 146 statute miles as Columbia free falls toward its encounter with the atmosphere. That will occur at an altitude of about 75 miles in about 13 minutes as it continues west, encountering the atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean to the north of the Hawaiian Islands.
Willie, we're with you on remaining APU start.
Pilot Willie McCool calling down that he's starting the 2 remaining auxiliary power units on board now, so all 3 will be up and running. They supply power for the shuttle's hydraulic systems.
Houston, here comes SSME Hyde repress.
And we're ready, Willie. No deltas.
Copy, no deltas.
Columbia's altitude now 135 statute miles as it continues to descend toward the atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean. All activities going smoothly on board. Columbia on track toward a touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center shuttle landing facility runway at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Evaluations still ongoing of runway selection, which end of the runway Columbia will approach. Currently targeted for runway 33 there, however. With Columbia on track for landing, we'll now go to the Kennedy Space Center for an update there on preparations to receive Columbia after its 16-day scientific journey.
This is Kennedy Space Center shuttle ground operations. After a flawless 16 days in orbit for Columbia, all is in readiness for its return to the shuttle landing facility. On orbit 255, Columbia will be crossing the Florida Panhandle, entering a portion of the Gulf of Mexico, and then crossing the coastline once again near Crystal River, moving inland to Orlando, and then proceeding eastward toward the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral. Most of the final landing preparations were completed on Friday. All of the convoy vehicles and their support systems were turned on and checked out, and there was a thorough sweep of the runway to check for possible debris. That sweep was repeated again this morning. The landing team began arriving at 6 a.m. and had an initial tag-up and landing status briefing at 6:45. All team members were required to be at their assigned stations at the runway at 7:15. There was a final briefing by the convoy commander to the landing team at 7:45. The 20 landing convoy vehicles were deployed to the end of the runway at 8:15 this morning. The shuttle landing facility at KSC is 15,000 feet long and 300 feet wide, about a third longer and twice as wide as a runway at a major commercial international airport. It is located about 3 miles northwest of the Complex 39 Vehicle Assembly Building. STS-107 marks the 62nd landing of the Space Shuttle Orbiter at the KSC runway. Following landing and return to the hangar, Columbia will be deserviced and then processed for its next mission this fall. Currently, the weather observation at the shuttle landing facility has a temperature of 52 degrees with winds westerly at 5 knots. The expected high during the day today on the runway while deservicing Columbia is underway is expected to be around 69 degrees with winds from the west-northwest 12 to 18 knots. Astronaut Kent Rogemer, accompanied by educator astronaut Barbara Morgan, began flying weather reconnaissance around the Cape Canaveral vicinity at 6:15 this morning, and over the last hour and a half have been flying approaches to the runway in the shuttle training aircraft. Rominger is reporting his observations back to Houston to weather astronaut Dwayne Carey and to the NOAA National Weather Service Spaceflight Meteorology Group. The mileage tracking station at KSC will acquire Columbia about 13 minutes before landing and will begin supplying controllers in Houston with voice, data, and telemetry communications starting about a minute later. At 11 minutes before touchdown, the orbiter will begin receiving navigation signals from the TACAN, which is the homing beacon, and the navigation signal at the shuttle landing facility. As Columbia intercepts the heading alignment circle, the first video should become available, and Columbia will cross directly overhead of the SLF, heading out over the Atlantic Ocean, making a gradual right turn toward a 7-mile final approach to runway 33. If that is the runway that is finally determined, that would be a southeast to northwest approach. Columbia's weight as it touches down on the runway will be 234,000 pounds. It will touch down at about 204 knots. After the orbiter's landing rollout is complete, there will then be the usual safety inspections, the so-called sniff checks to look for any toxic propellants which may have leaked or be venting. And the astronauts will configure switches in the cockpit for post-landing activities and participate with the KSC ground operations team to safe the vehicle. When the vehicle is deemed safe, all of the potential hazards and determination is made that there are no toxic gases around the orbiter. The purge and coolant umbilical access vehicle will move into position at the rear of the orbiter. Here we see the shuttle training aircraft with Kent Rominger, accompanied by Barbara Morgan, making approaches to the runway, making a final assessment as to the landing conditions and the runway of choice. After the purge and cooling system connections, the crew transport vehicle will be moved into position adjacent to the orbiter access hatch on Columbia's port side, and there will be a cursory inspection of the thermal protection system tiles, the wheels, and the other landing gear systems. About 45 minutes after landing, work will also begin to remove the orbiter's external tank separation camera. A physician will board Columbia shortly after the landing convoy arrives at Columbia's position on the runway. They will conduct a brief preliminary examination of the astronauts before the crew leaves the orbiter, and then the astronauts can make preparations to disembark and enter the crew transport vehicle for further medical evaluations. Because there are several medical test objectives for the crew this time, it will be longer than usual before the astronauts leave the shuttle landing facility runway. For the astronauts must remain reclined until this medical data can be collected while they are in the crew transport vehicle and through their return to the medical facilities at the astronaut quarters, which is located in the operations and checkout building about 5 miles south of the shuttle landing facility. So we expect to see only Commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, and flight engineer Dr. Kalpana Chawla leave the crew transport vehicle and do the traditional walk-around of the Space Shuttle orbiter. Because of the numerous life sciences experiments and test samples that must be removed from Columbia and the Space Hab while it's still on the runway, the start of the operation to tow Columbia to its hangar will not begin until very late this afternoon. Once back at the astronaut quarters, all of the crew will undergo thorough physical examinations, then have lunch and see their immediate family members, and they currently plan to go home to Houston on Sunday. Columbia's next mission is STS-118 in mid-November, planned to deliver the S-5 truss segment to the International Space Station, and the 6-member crew will include NASA educator astronaut Barbara Morgan. Visibility continuing to improve as we move toward our projected 9:16 a.m. landing time, and all convoy vehicles are in position ready to support the touchdown and rollout. From the shuttle landing facility, this is the Kennedy Space Center Ground Operations Control Center.
This is Mission Control, Houston, Columbia. Altitude is now 90 miles above the Pacific Ocean to the north of the Hawaiian Islands. About 2 minutes away from entering Earth's atmosphere. All activities continuing to go smoothly en route toward a touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Columbia is currently targeted toward runway 33 at the Kennedy Space Center. The runway selection continues to be discussed here in Mission Control, however, but for its approach to runway 33, Columbia would perform a right overhead turn to align with the runway of about 214 degrees around the heading alignment cylinder, an imaginary cylinder created by the microwave landing system for the shuttle that assists in guiding it for its final approach. Columbia's altitude now 71 statute miles as it enters Earth's atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean en route to the Kennedy Space Center. Its speed 17,000 miles per hour. Columbia with wings level and nose angled up about 40 degrees to control heating as it descends into the atmosphere. Its altitude now 68 miles. As Columbia descends into the atmosphere and approaches the continental United States, it'll perform the first in a series of 4 banks. It performs as it approaches the Kennedy Space Center. The first bank to the right, then back to the left, then back to the right, and then a final bank to the left as it approaches Kennedy and the shuttle landing facility runway. Those designed to dissipate speed for the shuttle as it descends into the atmosphere toward landing. Just under 30 minutes to touchdown for Columbia now. Altitude 64 miles. Columbia's course toward Florida will take it across the continental United States, crossing the California coast above the San Francisco Bay Area and continuing across Sacramento, California, providing a spectacular view for persons in that area of Columbia's descent through the atmosphere. That observation of the shuttle would begin about 5:51 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and continue for about 4 minutes till 5:55 a.m. Pacific Time, with the shuttle at an elevation of about 78 degrees. It'll be visible as well through much of the United States Southwest, above southern Nevada and northern Arizona and central New Mexico as it continues its descent through the atmosphere, trailing a plasma trail left as it heats the atmosphere around it during its descent. Columbia's altitude now 54 miles as it continues to descend into the atmosphere. Wings level, nose angled up 40 degrees to control heating. Columbia is traveling about 17,000 miles per hour. Columbia's altitude 48 statute miles as it begins the first in a series of 4 banks to dissipate speed as it descends into the atmosphere. Banking to the right now, a steep bank of 1,000 feet. Columbia is traveling about 17,000 miles per hour. Columbia's altitude 48 statute miles as it begins the first in a series of 4 banks to dissipate speed as it descends into the atmosphere, banking to the right now, a steep bank of 60 degrees, and approaching the west coast of the United States. Columbia speed 16,620 miles per hour. Range to touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center runway, 3,450 statute miles. Columbia in almost an 80-degree bank to the right to dissipate speed. The first of 4 banks it performs as it approaches Florida to slow down as it descends. Altitude now 47 miles, or about 248,000 feet. The shuttle speed is 16,400 miles per hour. Aboard the shuttle on the flight deck are Commander Rick Husband and pilot Willie McCool, flight engineer Kalpana Chawla, and mission specialist Laurel Clark. On the lower deck of the shuttle for entry, our payload commander Mike Anderson, mission specialist David Brown, and payload specialist from the Israel Space Agency Alon Ramon. Columbia approaching the coast of California now. It's predicted to cross the coast and be visible in the San Francisco area about 5:51 a.m. Central Time, Pacific Standard Time rather, and pass almost directly overhead of Sacramento, California. It actually crosses the California coast just to the north of the San Francisco area. Columbia is on target for runway 33 at the Kennedy Space Center Shuttle Landing Facility runway. Subject of runway selection has been discussed, and mission control continues to be discussed some, but in the meanwhile, at present, the original targeting for Columbia is toward runway 33, and as it approaches runway 33, it would perform a right overhead 212-degree turn to align with that runway around the heading alignment cylinder, an imaginary cylinder created by the microwave scan beam landing system at the shuttle runway that assists in the shuttle's guidance toward its final approach to the runway. Shuttle's altitude now 45 miles, speed 15,800 miles per hour, continuing in a right bank with wings angled 70 degrees, the first of 4 banks it performs to dissipate speed as it approaches landing. Columbia crossing the California coast, again just to the north of the San Francisco area. Its course will take it across Sacramento, California. Columbia continuing in a right bank, wings angled 43 degrees. Speed 15,000 miles per hour. Altitude 43 miles. 2,090 miles to touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center. Targeted for runway 33 at Kennedy at present. Crossing the continental United States, now crossing above southern Nevada to the north of Las Vegas. Columbia's course continuing across Arizona and the Arizona-New Mexico border near the Four Corners area of the United States. Its course will take it almost directly above Albuquerque, New Mexico. Its altitude now 225,000 feet or 42 miles. Speed 14,300 miles per hour. 1,785 miles to touchdown at the Kennedy Space Center. It's banking now back to the left, the second in a series of 4 banks that dissipate speed of the spacecraft as it becomes an aircraft and descends into the atmosphere toward Florida. Wings angled about 75 degrees to the left. Columbia continuing toward Florida, now approaching the New Mexico-Texas border. Altitude 40 miles. Speed 13,200 miles per hour. Range to touchdown 1,400 miles. The shuttle in the left bank with wings angled about 57 degrees to horizontal.
And Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages and we did not copy your last.
Roger,
Columbia out of communications at present with Mission Control as it continues its course toward Florida. "14 minutes to touchdown for Columbia at the Kennedy Space Center. Flight controllers are continuing to stand by to regain communications with the spacecraft.
Columbia, Houston, comm check. Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
Capcom Charlie Hobaugh calling Columbia on UHF frequency as it approaches the Merritt Island tracking station range in Florida. 12.5 minutes to touchdown according to clocks and Mission Control.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check. Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
Flight controllers are standing by for Columbia to move within communications range of the Merritt Island tracking station in Florida. To regain communications with Columbia. Also, flight controller standing by for tracking data of Columbia that also received through the Merritt Island tracking station.
UHF comm check.
Ten and a half minutes to anticipated touchdown for Columbia. Flight controllers are still standing by for C-band tracking data from the Merritt Island Tracking Station of Columbia and UHF communications.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
No.
8 minutes on the touchdown clock for Columbia. Flight controllers continuing to stand by to regain communications with the spacecraft. Flight controllers standing by for communications through the Merritt Island Tracking Station, a ground tracking site in Florida. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers are continuing to seek tracking data of Columbia. Touchdown clocks count down to 6 minutes to touchdown for the anticipated touchdown of Columbia at the Kennedy Space Center runway. Tracking data is being sought through the Merritt Island Tracking Station located near the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Communications with Columbia were lost at about 8 a.m. Central Time, about 10 minutes ago. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers are continuing to stand by for communications from Columbia. The last communications with the spacecraft occurred about 8 a.m. Central Time as it was above Central Texas. Currently seeking communications or tracking data from the spacecraft through C-band radar and ground tracking sites located at the Merritt Island Tracking Station in Florida. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers continue to seek tracking or communications with Columbia through Merritt Island Tracking Station. Last communications with Columbia was at 8 a.m. Central Time approximately above Texas as it approached the Kennedy Space Center for its landing. Flight Director Leroy Kane is now instructing controllers to get out their contingency procedures and begin to follow those. The Flight Dynamics Officer reports no tracking data from C-band radar at the Merritt Island Tracking Station has been reported of any objects. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight Director Leroy Kane is instructing controllers to follow contingency procedures. The last communications with the shuttle Columbia during its descent from orbit were at about 8 a.m. Central Time as it was descending through the atmosphere. At an altitude of about 207,000 feet, en route to the Kennedy Space Center, Florida, and a touchdown that was anticipated to occur about 2.5 minutes ago. Flight controllers received no further communications with the spacecraft after about 8 a.m. Central Time, and no further tracking data from the spacecraft was gained from C-band tracking radar at the Merritt Island tracking station in Florida. Contingency procedures in effect in Mission Control require all operators to conserve all their data and log books and notes that have been taken, that being instructed by Flight Director Leroy Kane, for controllers to begin following those steps and secure all information. Again, Flight Director Leroy Kane has declared a contingency. Flight controllers here in Mission Control are securing all their information, notes, and data gathered from the spacecraft. The last communications with Columbia at 8 a.m. Central Time as it was descending toward Florida for its landing. At that time, about 207,000 feet above central Texas, traveling approximately 12,500 miles per hour, 1,192 miles from its touchdown at Kennedy Space Center. Since 8 a.m., no communications were received with Columbia and no tracking data received through the Merritt Island tracking station. Those efforts made, the Flight Dynamics Officer reports no objects tracked through that tracking data. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here continue in a contingency operation, securing information and data. The last communications with the Space Shuttle Columbia were at 8 a.m. Central Time as it was flying 200,000 feet above Central Texas en route to the Kennedy Space Center for a landing. No communications have been received with the spacecraft since. No tracking data of objects of any kind reported by the Merritt Island tracking site and its C-band radar when used to sweep the sky. Flight Director Leroy Kane has declared a contingency. Flight controllers securing all information and data and notes. No tracking reported again of Columbia since about 8 a.m. Central Time as it was descending toward Florida, toward the Kennedy Space Center above Central Texas. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here continue in a contingency securing information and notes. Search and rescue teams have been mobilized to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. No tracking data or communications has been reported from the Space Shuttle Columbia since 8 a.m. Central Time this morning, as it flew 200,000 feet above north central Texas en route to a landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Contingency procedures and mission control have a flight controller securing all information and data. From today's shuttle descent. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here continue in a contingency, securing information and data from today's space shuttle descent of the shuttle Columbia. Columbia's last communication was received at about 8 a.m. Central Time as Columbia flew 200,000 feet above north central Texas. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted. No communications or tracking of any type was received after 8 a.m. Central Time along Columbia's planned route toward the Kennedy Space Center, toward a landing there this morning that had been planned to take place at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Again, last communications from the Space Shuttle Columbia were above north central Texas at 8 a.m. Central Time as it descended toward Florida. Any debris that is located in the central Texas area or in that vicinity should be avoided and can be potentially hazardous, and its location should be reported to NASA. Again, flight controllers here in Mission Control have declared a contingency, securing all information and data pertinent to today's descent of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Again, the last communications from Columbia was received at about 8 a.m. Central Time this morning as it descended above north central Texas en route to an 8:16 a.m. planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Any debris that may be found in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or in the vicinity of the last communications that was received with Columbia, again over the north central Texas area, should be avoided and reported to NASA and may be hazardous. This is Mission Control, Houston. Mission Control has declared a contingency as communications were lost with the Space Shuttle Columbia at 8 a.m. Central Time this morning as it was 200,000 feet above north central Texas en route to a landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted to the shuttle contingency. Any debris that is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area should be avoided and may be hazardous due to toxic substances used as propellants on the shuttle. Also, debris could be reported to NASA. This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here in Mission Control have declared a contingency as communications was lost with the Space Shuttle Columbia during its descent from orbit en route to a landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The last communications with Columbia occurred at about 8 a.m. Central Time as it was above the north central Texas area at an altitude of approximately 200,000 feet. Any debris that is located in the vicinity of the north central Texas area that may be related to the shuttle contingency should be reported to local law enforcement, who will then report to NASA. It should be avoided. Debris could be potentially hazardous due to toxic substances that are used as propellants on the space shuttle. Flight controllers here are securing all information and notes and data pertinent to the scheduled descent and landing of the shuttle today as part of contingency procedures. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted. Again, any debris that is located in the north central Texas vicinity that may be related to the space shuttle contingency should be reported to local law enforcement authorities and should be avoided as it may be hazardous due to toxic substances that are used as propellants for the space shuttle. This is Mission Control Houston. A contingency has been declared by flight controllers, securing all information, notes, and data pertinent to today's descent by Space Shuttle Columbia. Communications was lost with Columbia at 8 a.m. Central Time, as it was at an altitude of approximately 200,000 feet above the north central Texas area, en route to a planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center that was scheduled to occur at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted to the Space Shuttle contingency. Any debris that may be related to the Space Shuttle's contingency that is located in that region should be reported to local law enforcement, who will relay that information to NASA. It should be avoided, as the debris could be hazardous due to toxic propellants that are used on board the Space Shuttle. Again, any debris that is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area should be avoided, as it may be hazardous due to toxic propellants used on board the Space Shuttle. This is Mission Control Houston. A contingency for the space shuttle has been declared in Mission Control. Flight controllers here are securing all information, data, and notes pertinent to the descent of the Space Shuttle Columbia this morning from orbit. The last communications were received from the Space Shuttle Columbia at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time, as it was an altitude of about 200,000 feet above north central Texas, en route to a planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted to the Space Shuttle contingency. Any debris that may be located in the Dallas-Fort Worth vicinity should be avoided and may be hazardous due to the toxic nature of propellants used on board the shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities. To repeat, any debris that is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area should be avoided, as it may be hazardous due to toxic substances used as propellant on board the space shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities. This is Mission Control Houston.